Good morning, everyone. This is Sunday, December 27th, 2015. Our subject today is Christian Science, and we will continue. Yesterday, for those of you, maybe some of you who weren't there for the Bible study, we had a very good Bible study. Thank you, Mike. And we are continuing with the last question, which we started yesterday but didn't finish. So, Mike, you want to read the last question?
Yes, thank you very much. Who did Jesus say he was?
We left off, we were talking about in Matthew, where Jesus is asking his disciples, who do you say that I am? And they first had some answers. Some say this, some say that, but then he said, but who do you say that I am? And what did Peter answer?
You're
the Christ.
Yes, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And was Jesus pleased with that answer? What did he say?
He was pleased because after hearing what the other disciples had earlier, and when Peter said that he was the Christ, I think he was pleased. In addition to that, he made known to them that flesh and blood did not reveal this to him, but my Father who is in heaven. And he continued from there.
Thank you. Yeah, and that we emphasize as a very important point, that he didn't get it from what other people said, and he didn't get it from the human mind, but that God revealed it to him. And he was listening to his Father. And that ability to hear God, not to just take other hearsay as what's true, but to hear it directly from God, that this was what he was going to build his church on. My church, he called it. That ability to acknowledge and see the Christ, and also the ability to hear God's voice and to act on it. I don't even think Peter realized what he had done. And of course, a little while later, he messed up, not hearing the Father's voice, and by getting a human sense of things. And when Jesus was telling about the fact he would have to be crucified, and Jesus, oh, no, not that. And Jesus rebuked that. What does that show, this story about Peter?
Shows that we must be always on guard and not look to the human mind for anything.
Yes. It shows that one moment you can be a reflection for God, and the next few moments later, perhaps you are not. So, it's very important.
Also, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, I think also sometimes, of course, let me speak for myself in this journey. Often when I've had some kind of a light bulb go off in understanding something, and I'm all excited, and then in the morning something would come up, just to, as if it wants to knock it out or something. And it's remaining that humility of always listening to God is what helps to overcome these things.
Thank you very much.
Yes, and we should all be prepared for that, because it will happen to everybody, more or less. You'll see something wonderful, you'll experience a healing, you'll see someone else experience a healing, and in the morning you'll say, did I really see that? But did that really happen? Well, maybe it would have happened anyway.
Well, why has it not happened to me?
I think this is a lot what Mrs. Eddie's been trying to teach her students so much, to handle animal magnetism It's one thing to get an acknowledgement of the truth and the good, but to be unwary of the fact that the devil would like to come right behind it and argue otherwise is the thing that we need to be watchful for. It brings to memory an experience I had frequently when I would get up on Wednesday and give a testimony. It would be about a healing that I had, and it was wonderful. It would be the very next day, Thursday, I would have an experience that looked like it reversed the very thing that I testified about the day before. And this went on for a few consecutive weeks, actually, until I got wise to the point I realized, whoa,
Yes.
the truth is that healing really did happen, and then the devil would like to argue otherwise if I would let it, which I finally am waking up to not letting it happen.
Yeah, to be ever watchful, and if something like that comes, to realize what it is. It's impersonal animal magnetism, getting you to doubt yourself, your faith in God. Or sometimes this happens too. I'll hear it. Someone will give a really good testimony, and then you sit down and you think, oh, that was just terrible. Why did I say that?
The person who just gave it. That is.
Yeah, the person who gave it thinks it's terrible.
I've done that a bunch of times.
Yes, many times.
So if you have prayed over what you're doing and you're letting God use you, then trust it. It was interesting. The soloist at the Christmas Eve service was Faith's husband. And what did he tell you, Carol?
I congratulated him on such a beautiful job that he did to sing "Oh Holy Night." And he said that he'd had a really difficult week. He'd had very little sleep, and he kind of doubted what was going to come out of him. And he said, but the vessel worked. I thought that was so great. He realized he wasn't doing it, that it was God using him.
Yes, I believe God.
Yeah, and that's a humility to take it back to God anytime you have done something like that. And you see, probably Peter didn't. When he got praised by the master for saying something so stupendous, he thought, whoa, I'm really good.
Yeah.
I'm really good. And so then when later Jesus was prophesying what would happen to him, well, Peter thought, well, I'm so good, I can tell Jesus a thing or two. And no, Lord, that's not going to happen. We're not going to let that happen to you. Because it was a human estimation of what he'd done rather than to give God the glory. So these are such subtle nuances, but maybe not so subtle, but they're important you understand. Now, Jesus spoke of my church, and the word church, I read, there's a Greek word for it, and in those days it had no religious connotation. It was more just a group of people gathering together. In other words, not the material organization. And it was interesting. I spoke to some of you about this, but last Sunday we watched the movie or the documentary called Pilgrim. And one very important point was that the reason that they left England was because the church and the state were intertwined, that in those days, at that time, and some churches still believe this, you couldn't worship God on a one-to-one basis. You had to have a bishop or someone else. And William Bradford, in particular, was impressed with a Bible verse, when 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I in the midst of thee. And he realized in praying that this was the pure Christianity. This was the Christianity that the church was built on early on, the early Christian way. And when he realized he could not worship that way, although they tried to do this in England, they first moved to Holland, and then they took this horrendous voyage on this little boat, the Mayflower, and endured tremendous hardship. But the purpose was to be able to worship God as the early Christians, without any bishops and popes and all this intercessory. Anyway, and things coming between them and God. Now, when Mrs. Eddy established her church, and this is in the manual, she wrote it, she made a motion in 1879. She says to organize a church designed to commemorate the word and works of our Master, which should reinstate primitive Christianity and its lost element of healing. So truly, to me, it was this idea of reinstating the primitive Christianity that Jesus established here that day with Peter, the basis of it. And it must always be kept in our hearts as to what it is, and then to rediscover its lost element of healing. This is the purpose of it. We mustn't lose sight of it.
Wonderful. Sometimes they use the phrase ecclesiastical interference. In other words, when the organization gets so big, it interferes with its really true purpose.
Right.
And then you lose the healing.
And as Jesus pointed out later with Peter, the ecclesiasticism is the human mind trying to interfere with what the divine mind is doing.
That's it. That's what it always is. It is always the human mind interfering. So that's what we watch for. That's what is always what's rebuked, is the human mind. And that's the enemy. It's always that. It's never people, but the human mind infiltrating. So anyone else about this?
Well, I just have to add that as I was preparing for the session this morning, I was looking through miscellany and open to this. It's insufficient freedom, and Mrs. Eddy writes, to my sense, the most imminent dangers confronting the coming century are robbing of people of life and liberty under the warrant of the Scriptures, claims of political and of human power, industrial slavery, insufficient freedom of honest competition, and ritual creed and trust in place of the golden rule. Whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do even so to them. And I think that just backs up what you had just said.
Yes, where did you get that?
That is page 266 in miscellany. It's called Insufficient Freedom.
Thank you.
Well,
Jeremy?
we have to thank God.
Okay, Jeremy?
Something I found about going to God directly, and I guess is also about the ecclesiastical thing, it's from Watching Point 84. Animal magnetism might be defined at this point as contentment with secondhand thinking. One who has reflected a spiritual idea from God cannot pass it on to another and have it a fresh spiritual revelation to the latter. Every man's salvation depends upon his success in going to God and reflecting his thoughts and wisdom directly from that primitive source. To be veritable divine science, the Holy Ghost must be reflected from the Father to the Son, since in reality the Son is the expression of the Father.
Thank you. And that's a very main and important point. And that's where you get the independent thinking. You get your thoughts from God and, question what others say or tell you. And don't answer as that whoever the disciple was. Well, some say you're this, that, and the next thing. What do you think? What is your thought? What are you demonstrating? And if you haven't done that, you're just sitting on the edge. You're just almost like a Pharisee or someone else. You're just not thinking for yourself. You're not taking hold of this divine intelligence that we all have to think independently with the Father.
And I think Jesus' own example shows this. He was always referring to God as Father. I think even in this lesson, our current lesson, John 14, it mentions He, Father, about 10 times. So it's like that direct connection, Son and Father, Son and Father. I mean, we don't go through someone to go to even our earthly fathers. So I think He's showing us this direct contact with God. Father.
Yes, thank you. I love that, the fact He always called God Father. That was His relationship. Direct, tender, loving relationship.
One of his greatest concerns was that people would not establish their own relationship with God, but would rather rely on Him personally or revere Him personally. That's why, the lawyer who came up to him and addressed him as good master got a rebuke, didn't he? There is none good but God. And I think Mrs. Eddy even had that same concern. She was concerned that people would worship her or kind of, stop their journey towards God at her and not make it directly to God.
Yeah, it's always a concern, and that's with a practitioner, a good practitioner turns you to God. Sometimes, probably Florence too, I know I get people saying, well, what would you do about this, or I need some advice, and I always say, I never give advice. Practitioner does not give advice. They turn you to God, and they strengthen you. They do not weaken you. You're always turned to God to figure things out for yourself. The practitioner will pray and support and help open thought, but it's still between you and God. And I couldn't give advice because what I might do in any given situation wouldn't be right for what someone else should do. You have to get it from God.
Those lessons I learned really well earlier on. It's only God alone, direct.
Yes.
Right. And that's why you've heard that there's no formula for how to deal with any individual situation. Someone asked, well, how does a Christian Scientist celebrate Christmas? Remember someone asking that question? Well, there is no formula. You do what's right for you under the circumstances. And only God can tell you what's right for you at any moment in time. And that's how we have dominion. I mean, that's the freedom.
That is thinking for yourself. And I know this time we just went through, Christmas time, is a time for you to exercise that freedom and not have others tell you what to do and how to do it. You get your answer from God, and you do as God bids you. And that alone, not church people, not human relations, not anybody, but God. And in that way, you'll find a tremendous sense of peace and strength. And even when you make mistakes, perhaps you thought you heard God, but maybe it wasn't God, then you learn from that. At least it's an honest mistake that you made, not because someone else told you to do it. That only leads to resentment. But you made the mistake, so you'll learn. In Precepts, I believe, Carpenter talks about taking the divinity course. And the divinity course is where you get your direction directly from God, which we're all taking that. That's our class instruction, the divinity course from God. But, I was also thinking we're so blessed here in this church because sometimes people will ask about class instruction. And, of course, we have Bible study and Roundtable, which is wonderful. But we also have these books. Mrs. Wilcox's Association Addresses, Bicknell Young, Kimball. You want to take class, take from them. Take from Eustace. These are their classes, and they're still going on strong, teaching us. What better teacher could you have, quote, unquote, if that's what you're looking for? But the ultimate teacher is Mrs. Eddy, of course, and I'm always usually surprised by how little people know what are actually in her works, which is why we go over everything so much. And also what's in the Bible.
I think it's also because a lot of people are coming from a denomination, I would say, that's right. I mean, like other churches or culture where you have to go to a pastor or priest or somebody and expect that person to solve your problem instead of you going to God, knowing that you have that dominion to go to God and God will reveal it. And if you, like you said, if you need guidance, somebody can guide you through how to seek that power that you already have. But other churches, Catholic is one example where people go and seek. And for this priest to impress, sometimes they do things they are not supposed to do, and they say things they are not supposed to because they know what was expected from them. Like they are the one who are actually solving that problem instead of God, or they are not.
Right. You have to be very careful of that, of course. What else? We can continue now as to what else did Jesus say he was? I mean, that chapter is significant.
Well, in John, can I say something? Please. Jesus said, I am the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger, and he that believeth on me shall never thirst. And when the Jews heard him speaking this, they took great objection. And so then he said, I say unto you, he that believeth on me hath everlasting life. I am that bread of life. Your fathers did eat manna in the wilderness and are dead. This is the bread which cometh down from heaven, that a man may eat thereof and not die. I am the living bread which came down from heaven. If any man eat of this bread, he shall live forever. And then Peter, and a lot of, at this point, this was said to be a very hard saying for people to understand. And at that time, many of his disciples went away and walked no more with him. So Jesus said unto his 12 disciples, will ye also go away? Then Simon Peter answered him, Lord, to whom shall we go? Thou hast the words of eternal life, and we believe and are sure that thou art that Christ, the Son of the living God.
Thank you.
Why do you think the other disciples left him?
Well, I think the Jews had some impact on some of them. They were Jewish, and they were there in Jerusalem, in that culture. And the idea that he's saying he's the bread of life, who eateth my flesh and drinketh my blood hath eternal life. It was just too...
Yeah, but what does that mean? What was their problem?
Couldn't understand that. They didn't.
Well, it was
the demands making
claiming too much for himself personally, in a way, is what they may have thought.
They took it humanly.
Yeah.
They didn't see the spiritual message.
No, they didn't understand.
Too literal.
I mean, one of the things that I find very, very helpful is, Jesus, throughout the Bible, Jesus sometimes referred to himself as the Son of Man, and he sometimes referred to himself as the Son of God. And he made that distinction for an important reason. Because I mean, he was God's messenger, and yet he had to show people through his life what that message was. And he was always having to explain to people that he was not God. But he was showing people who and what God was. And whenever he taught, whenever you see the word I spoken by Jesus, I've gone through the Bible and I can't find one place where when Jesus refers to himself as I, in every place he means the Christ. He does not mean the person, Jesus. I am the bread of life. What he means is the Christ.
Mrs. Eddy explains that, and of course in Science and Health, Jesus is the man, Christ is the divine idea that was before Abraham, and it's with us still. What would be the interpretation of eating of his flesh?
Mary, could we go back to the question that you asked about why the other disciples went away?
Sure.
The reason I feel they went away is because Jesus came as a spiritual king and not as a physical warrior king. And that's what I think they wanted him to do. And he didn't do it because that's not what he was about. And I think it's not about saying Jews because they were all Jews. It was about his spiritual stand. It's like the level of Christian Science that you are asking us to work with is really the truth, the Christ. And other people are just okay with just living on the status quo. So I think that that's really the problem there.
Thank
Right.
you.
Right. They were looking for a human savior.
Yeah, right.
A political savior.
Exactly.
And that was not what he was about.
Exactly.
And they also think that he was requiring them to do what they think it's not possible, they cannot do. Because he's requiring them that they have to.
Right. He was forcing them to give up their human ambition and human beliefs.
Is it not why people go away from Christian Science because they think it's unattainable?
Right, that's
Yes,
true. And
I
Mrs.
don't
Eddy
understand.
no. There are two things. I wrote about this in the forum. Mrs. Eddy writes about it in the lesson this week. Two things why people would not accept science. One is they don't understand it, and the second is they have some personal error in them that they don't want to give up. And if you come to the light, it will be exposed. So the reason those disciples left is one of those reasons. Either they didn't understand what he was saying, they were humanizing it, not understanding it, or they had some errors that they were indulging in that they didn't want to have to change. When people don't want to give up their pride, when their pride is rebuked, they get their feelings hurt. And I see it all the time, and they leave.
Even this church.
It happens in this church, it does. And we've gotten a lot more gentle and kind about it. But it's still, people don't want to be corrected. So, and that's too bad for the person, because Lord knows, those of us that have remained here in Plainfield, have we ever been corrected and our pride just beaten to a pulp? And that's a good thing. No, because along with the pride comes the shame, and they're both not of God. You're not bad and you're not good. God is good and animal magnetism is bad. You impersonalize it, and then you will make progress, and you will be freer and happier than you've ever been in your life. So, what does it mean to eat of the flesh? What do you do when you eat something? What
Goes
happens?
away.
What?
It goes away. You don't have it anymore.
Yes, thank you, Sharon. Sharon, say it loudly.
You digest it.
Don't say, aren't you told you are what you eat? You become it. That's the meaning of this. To eat of Jesus' flesh, You become it. You become him. You digest all what he's telling you. You take it in and you become it. And with that digestion, there is no indigestion unless you're broiling and rejecting it.
Is the assimilation.
Yes. Absolutely.
Sounds better than digestion.
Okay. All right.
Well, the phrase imbibe the Spirit.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah. Drink it in, take it in, into every part of yourself.
Right. Make it the essence of your being.
Yeah, I like what you said, because he keep telling them when he give them that, when he give them the drink during this period of time, he told them drink all of it. Don't leave anything out.
Fill your vessel with the truth.
Yeah, and the whole thing. You've got to do the whole thing. You can't be picking, well, I'll do this part of it, but I won't do that part of it. I'll just do the nice things, but this other stuff I'm not so sure about. Like, well, you know what things you don't want to do. Rebuking or having to perhaps not spend a lot of time with friends or family members who are resisting or rejecting the truth because you find it makes you ill.
Or there are some, I've heard this before, that there are people who say, well, I practice Christian Science at home, but when I go to work, I've got a job to do.
That's a bad one. That's
I wonder what kind of job is that?
Yeah. Well, yeah, all of these things. You've got to imbibe it and live it all the time, and that's what eating his flesh means. Anything else, of course, would not be. No. You would be interpreting it humanly, and therefore, of course, you couldn't do it.
Well, I think it's interesting you talk about a job, because I think with this stuff, if we were to go back to school or get a new job, we would do everything we could to do a good job at it. So why wouldn't we do that with this?
Yeah.
You know, if there's something that we have to do, we would do it for a job. You know, we would do it for $15 an hour, so we might as well do it for this.
Exactly. Thank you. Absolutely. And this, the price is beyond measure. It's the pearl of great price. And yet so little time is devoted to it. You want to know why people don't understand science? Because they devote so little time to trying to understand it or trying to live it. That's why. That's very simple.
But that's why I think if you see it as a pearl, then you will go after it as such. If you don't value something enough, I mean, you know, it's here or there. I think that's, you know, if it's really change something and you really appreciate, grateful for something, then you spend the time with it. You can't but.
Absolutely.
Well, that's why when you, I mean, well, my experience was when I walked into the church and got a copy and heard what was going on, it was recognizable to be the answer. But then you really, the teaching is very, very important to me.
Thank you.
Well, I think that one of the things that is the spirit. You know, you can't just, you could read the Science and Health. There are lots of practitioners and lecturers who quote the Science and Health backwards and forward, and the spirit is not there. And that's the challenge for us to understand the spirit.
Absolutely.
And how do you understand the Spirit?
Yeah, that's an ongoing thing. We can't give it up. That's, you know, that's eating the flesh.
I think the parallel with Jesus' time is the confusion then came that the Pharisees taught a Judaism, or whatever you want to call it, that was perverted by human concepts. So then the people that had the choice of following Jesus had this counterfeit, because Jesus always rebuked using the same scriptures that the Pharisees had corrupted. And I'm finding today that it was easier to make the leap from atheism to Christian Science and make the leap from a lot of the concepts I was given in Christian Science prior to coming to Plainfield, that I would battle with myself. Okay, I read Mrs. Eddy said this way, but everybody else says this. So why would I think that I know better about Mrs. Eddy than they did? So it's very hard to trust.
And
what
like
I was
you said,
reading.
they were using the same language, so it makes it confusing.
Right.
And that's why ultimately you get it directly from God. Ultimately, you have to learn to trust your spiritual sense.
But I think that was Zara, as she said, it's the grasping or having the spiritual support, because when I get the spiritual support here, then I can trust what I've read, because I have a way of measuring it which I didn't have before. I mean, it's understanding of when I'm agitated and I read something and it contradicts what Christian Science conventional said, but by knowing that the calming effect means that was God speaking and I understood it correctly is huge, because I never knew that until 6 months ago.
Right.
This is true.
Right. And that's why a good church is a very valuable thing.
It is.
Well, but that's right, and that's this is why I'm saying is that it's very good. I mean, I've tried to go to God for 10 years, and learning how to go to God is different than me just going to God and not knowing how to do it. So the coaching and the teaching is so important, and that's what I'm saying. The way that it's being done here, and I should throw in another advertisement. I really think this lesson, it was given, this week's lesson was on Christian Science, was given at every Christmas in the future. I would absolutely enjoy it. I just think it was stellar, so I appreciate it very much.
The lesson we get here in Plainfield augments. If you compare the two lessons, you see, the Spirit is taking me further. Otherwise, it's rather flat, and you understand why people are not getting the healings that they want.
Yes.
So it's not saying you're better, it's just that you understand the science. It's like if you take calculus, you understand science much better than if you're just sitting there putting, very small things together but could come together. This is a real science. This is us putting the facts together with the Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And that's why Jesus said, on this rock, he will build his church.
Yes. Yes.
That is. And that's why Mrs. Eddy refers to Christ's Christianity, because there's so many false concepts of Christianity and so many churches that are not Christ's church.
Well, I can't help but going back to what you said, and we didn't actually kind of brush it off, I guess, but why would somebody leave Christian Science at home and go to work? What are you going to work with? I've been thinking about, I feel like that's the worst thing somebody can do. What it'd be like, if you're doing that, you're wasting your time here, because we are being trained so that we can go out there and be a light. And there's no way you can be a light out there if you're not going out with God, if you're not going out with Christ. You are denying Christ, actually, which I think is the greatest sin.
That's not being taught.
Well, Benjamin, that's why you're the clerk of the church. There are people in this world, believe it or not, who go to Christian Science Church selfishly because they want to make their life better. And they don't give a rat's ass about anybody else.
You see?
Yeah.
There are people who try to use Christian Science to make their life better.
And that's a totally perverted sense of it. It's as if God is here for us rather than the opposite, which is the truth. We are here to glorify God. And that's a very perverted sense of Christian Science. And it has been, so many things have been perverted. And it is why we go over it and discuss it, and we don't really compare ourselves to anything else. We focus on what we're doing and the truth, and pray that those who need us and who are ready for us will find it. some of the reason that people don't understand science is they do come with their old baggage of their old theology. And that is why Mrs. Eddy has so many lessons on old theology as everlasting punishment, probation after death, ancient and modern, some of it too, Adam and Eve. We go over it and over and over it because you unwittingly bring your baggage of what you formerly thought was the truth, perhaps, and you bring it into Christian Science and you end up perverting it because you are trying to incorporate it in the purity of the science, and it cannot be done. But it's part of what has led to the misunderstanding of it. And that's why all of this cleansing and purifying must continually go on. And that's why we read these lessons twice a year, because we're never done with that purifying until we've totally ascended.
Yeah.
So.
But when I look at this, I think that what you just said, Mary, shows a lot of humility, because I don't have a feeling from you that you are standing here saying to me, I'm spiritually so much further than you, so I'm the end answer. And this is what you can get in some churches, some traditional CS churches, where somebody says, I'm the practitioner, so I know everything, and the rest of you know nothing. You get us to engage in finding the truth for ourselves, and that's an invaluable lesson.
Thank you. Well, and that also is not science, because if I were to think that I know everything and you don't, I would be absolutely saying I know nothing about Christian Science, because
you'd be malpracticing.
You would be malpracticing.
True. But this goes on in really high places. I don't want to go into where, but it's amazing.
Well, you're right. We've all experienced the ecclesiastical despotism.
Yeah.
That so many people in the organization, even those supposedly running the so-called organization, don't know the science.
Yeah, and it's often...
And that's why the churches are closing.
True.
When Florence and I ever speak, our main thrust of the conversation is to keep our humility and make sure everyone to stay humble over everything. That's the most important thing. You lose that, you lose it all.
And we hear that from the two of you.
Well, that's the only way, which leads us into what else did Jesus say about himself? The Father, he doeth
the works.
Yes. He was the ultimate in humility. He didn't go around tooting his horn or telling everybody all the things he did.
He never took credit personally for anything.
Never.
But it was so wonderful that he promised them. He understood that they could not understand all with him. But he promised them another comforter that would guide them into all truth.
Yes.
So wonderful that he said he would go and he would pray the Father. I'm going to my Father, and I will pray the Father that he give you another comforter that will stay with you forever.
Absolutely. Yes. That's just beautiful. And we had such a good discussion yesterday about the Holy Ghost, divine science, the comforter, and what that means. And fairly at the end, I want you to read from Prose Works, so please have it out.
Okay.
You've already.
I don't know exactly where in Prose.
I'll let you know at the end. I just have the book ready.
Okay.
So he knew the Father doeth the works. He said it over and over. Such humility. That's why he could do what he did, because he knew it wasn't him. The minute you think it's you, you lose it. You will lose it. That's what's so wonderful about this religion. You can't misuse it. If you misuse it, you will lose it.
And he also told them, if you go down here where he said, verily, verily, I say unto you, he that believeth on me, the works that I do shall he do also, and greater work than this shall he do.
What does the word believe mean in that context?
Oh, thank you.
Understand is me?
Understand.
Him. If you
Understand what?
Christ, not him as a human Jesus, but to understand Christ is operating in him.
Understand the truth. Or understands God.
Yeah, this is a big one. What the word believe has been translated to believe. What it really means is he that understands the principle that I am teaching, do what I do. That is, and a lot of people have misinterpreted that saying. You know, there's these people who say, well, believe on Jesus. Do you believe on Jesus? You know, do you believe? Well, what does that mean? A lot of people misinterpret it to think that, you know, do you worship the man Jesus? And there are people who have even gone so far as to say, well, Jesus is God. How bizarre is that? Again, it's the personalization of the message that screws it up.
Believing is understanding the principles and laws. And as it's stated in this week's lesson, that's why Mrs. Eddy wrote Science and Health. Before, people understood somewhat about this, but she wrote the principles and the laws and how to apply them. And her life, as written by Gilbert Carpenter, shows in detail how she lived the rules and principles, how she demonstrated them in her life. So we can go and do likewise, individually, and then collectively. So this is the believing, and so then, yeah, there's a lot of arguments that Jesus is God. Nowhere did he say that. I can't find that. And people object to Christian Science because we don't believe he is God. If he is God, then the rest of us are, well, what are we? We have no hope to do what he did because he's God, and I'm not God, nor is anybody here.
Right. That interpretation is a cop-out because it makes his commands and his example totally impractical for the rest of us. And would a good God do that to us? Would a good God do that to his own creation? I mean, think of how cruel that would be.
Disciples, as the time progresses, like you said, as they began to understand the application of this principle, they start doing wonderful things. Even many of the things that Jesus did, even some people who didn't even know Jesus. For example, he was never a disciple of Jesus, but he understood the principle, and he did a marvelous work for God and for us, all of us.
And I believe it's Martha Wilcox who brings out the greater works that he says that we would do. Well, what could be greater works except to prevent the problems from coming up in the first place? Prevent the illnesses, prevent the wars, to do this work so that they don't even happen. That is the greater work. And that is what we are enlisting in right now, to do this greater work. So we don't have all these tragedies. And this is the leaven of truth at work. Quietly, secretly, to some degree, doing this work and spiritualizing all mankind. This is why we watch, and we will continue to watch. So important, this work, that it be continued. Now, the bell is going to ring in a moment, so today in questions and answers, fairly, turn to page 77. That's a long question and answer, but it sort of sums up a lot of what we have talked about, and I'd like Fairly to read it. We lose Fairly? There.
Sorry, I thought I was on mute.
Okay.
Did the salvation of the eunuch depend merely on his believing that Jesus Christ was the Son of God? It did. But this believing was more than faith in the fact that Jesus was the Messiah. Here the verb believe took its original meaning, namely, to be firm, yea, to understand those great truths asserted of the Messiah. It meant to discern and consent to that infinite demand made upon the eunuch in those few words of the apostle. Philip's requirement was that he should not only acknowledge the incarnation, God made manifest through man, but even the eternal unity of man and God as the divine principle and spiritual idea, which is the indissoluble bond of union, the power and presence in divine science of life, truth, and love to support their ideal man. This is the Father's great love that he has bestowed upon us, and it holds man in endless life and one eternal round of harmonious being. It guides him by truth that knows no error, and with supersensual, impartial, and unquenchable love. To believe is to be firm. In adopting all this vast idea of Christ Jesus, the eunuch was to know in whom he believed. To believe thus was to enter the spiritual sanctuary of truth, and there learn, in divine science, somewhat of the All-Father-Mother God. It was to understand God and man. It was sternly to rebuke the mortal belief that man has fallen away from his first estate, that man, made in God's own likeness and reflecting truth, could fall into mortal error, or that man is the father of man. It was to enter unshod the Holy of Holies, where the miracle of grace appears, and where the miracles of Jesus had their birth, healing the sick, casting out evils, and resurrecting the human sense, the belief that life, God, is not buried in matter. This is the spiritual dawn of the Messiah and the overture of the angels. This is when God is made manifest in the flesh, and thus it destroys all sense of sin, sickness, and death, when the brightness of his glory encompasseth all being.
Amen.
Amen.
And that, my friends, is Christmas. So we'll go to have a wonderful, wonderful service, and thank you, Fairly. And thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.